Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the third session. I am Tejan Gyungkyap and I'll be moderating the third session, which is a very special lecture on overview of four mindfulness in Pali Sutra. Our chairperson for the session is Venerable Thammapiyaji, Secretary General of International Buddhist Studies Confederation (IBC), and our speaker is Professor Asanga Tilarakniji, founder of Head of Department of Buddhist Studies, University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. I request both our speaker and chairperson to kindly come up on the dais. Before handing over the session to our chairperson, just a quick reminder that there will be 40 minutes for our speaker and 15 minutes for question and answer session. Over to you, Venerable Thammapiyaji.
A very good afternoon and welcome back to this third session of today's technical deliberation. We are supposed to start this third technical session at 4:10. Yeah, around 4:10. But now I think it is 4:52. That means we are running by 40 minutes late. And I have actually a meeting maybe after this session, so I will not take much time to speak as chair. Okay, and he's saying if there is any issue, then he'll come to replace my, to take up my responsibility. Thank you so much, Venerable. We have been listening to different scholars since morning, and this is the third session and last session for today. I do not know whether we are getting clarity or we are getting confused on the path. That I only say this is the path or the way, tested way, there should not be any doubt. By hearing from these peer scholars, if there is any kind of doubt about the path, I think we have to bear for some time. And it came to my mind, as I have mentioned in the morning, about the swimming. So we may have different theories or preparations about the swimming, and we may have differences and other theories for swimming, and we may debate and argue theoretically in the hall. But I'm sure all those who debate and argue about the swimming, different techniques, different dress, different style, when all they are put into water, what will happen? They will try somehow to save themselves so that they don't get drowned and die. Right? So I think that is a very important aspect. That practically, when you are put into practice, then you'll be trying to learn how to save yourself from getting drowned and dying. So also I understand in this Satipaṭṭhāna, or the technique of enlightenment, we do not know the importance of the breath, the breathing. We think it is so free. We got the breathing from the time of our birth that it's not important. But somehow if something happens, our all nostrils got blocked and also mouth got blocked. What would happen? say for around 5 minutes, 10 minutes, then goes on, that time we'll understand the importance of the breathing. That's how actually this Satipaṭṭhāna, where the Buddha asked us to start with Anapanasati, that is observing the breath. When we start observing the breath, then we know the importance of breath, how it can purify our mind and lead us to a higher level of concentration and also transformation. So we have here today with us a very renowned scholar from Sri Lanka, our neighboring country, and we had very good relation, historic relation with Sri Lanka and India, way back to Ashoka the Great and his son and daughter, when they have taken the seat of Buddhism or Buddha Dhamma to Sri Lanka. And when the Dhamma or the Buddhism declined in India, as many scholars say, disappeared from India, then we had Anagarika Dhammapala, who brought back the Buddhist revival movement in India. So we had very historic connection with Sri Lanka. I would heartily welcome our Professor Asanga Tilakaratneji. He is a renowned scholar who is a senior chair professor of Pali and Buddhist studies and founder head of the Department of Buddhist Studies in University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. In 1999 to 2000, Professor Tilakaratne was a senior Commonwealth Fellow and was attached to Oriental Institute, Oxford University. During 2003 and 2006, he served as the director of Postgraduate Institute of Pali and Buddhist Studies, University of Kelania, that is in Sri Lanka. Sorry. He has served as visiting professor at Yonsei University, Korea, Otago University, New Zealand, Savitribai Phule Pune University, India, Sumaya Vidya Vihar, Mumbai, India, and Sitago International Buddhist Academy, Myanmar. He has published both in Sinhala and English more than 100 papers on Buddhist studies. Of his more recent academic works, Theravada Buddhism, The View of the Elders, 2012, was published by University of Hawaii Press in the series of Dimensions of Asian Spirituality. He co-edited with Professor Oliver Abhinayaka, 2,600 Years of Sambuddhatva, Global Journey of Awakening, 2012, a work covering the history and the current status of global Buddhism of all three traditions. So please welcome Professor Asanga Tilakaratneji, please. So you can take your own time because I have someone to replace me.
Okay.
No problem.
So I just go by this. Okay.
That's okay. That's okay.
Very good evening to everybody. Venerable Dr. Dhammaphiya, the chairperson of the session. Thank you very much, Venerable, for the nice sentiments. As you said, we received Buddhism from Sri Lanka, and then at some point we gave it back to India, and it is really heartening to see that my association with Indian Buddhist scholarship has been the last 30 to 40 years, and then I really see there is quite a lot of development and the advancement in Buddhist studies in this country. With these basic expressions, Venerable Karma Gelek Yuthok, Venerable Sir, and Venerable Doji Damdul, the Director of Tibetan Buddhist Institute, distinguished professors, Professor Bhatt, Professor Sen, and all the scholars, bhikshus and bhikshunis, friends. I would like to thank Venerable Dr. Geshe for inviting me for this occasion. In fact, when you see all over the world people are talking about mindfulness, when I got this invitation about Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, I thought that is something interesting because as several speakers mentioned earlier, today mindfulness has become kind of very popular, the word in the, particularly, not really in Asian context very much, but of course outside Asia, Europe, America, Australia, and all these countries. And you have mindful eating, mindful dancing, mindful sex, and whatnot. Everything is mindfully there. So not only that, what the Buddha taught 2,600 years ago, some medical doctors and psychologists have got franchise for those things. And I saw one time Times magazine carried one big, the covering article. I went through the whole thing. Luckily, there was only one place where they said that this comes from Buddhism. That's all. At some, cursorily, they mentioned that only that acknowledgement. So, in such a context, I thought, going back to the basic root of this whole practice is something, although not very fashionable, I thought that is the right thing to do, because we need to really go into the deep into how the practice began. Now, in fact, I should thank two of my junior colleagues, Ujjwal Kumar and Animesh Prakash, for making my job much easier, because particularly Animesh, my presentation is virtually your presentation. So thank you very much for making it much easy. Actually, I just mentioned their names as Ujjwal Kumar and Animesh, not out of disrespect, but for almost through decade or something, I have seen these young scholars developing as good Buddhist scholars, and which is something very nice. And also we really need a strong, textually strong, traditionally strong Buddhist scholarship with modern orientation. So this is what we really need. So thank you, Animation. Thank you, Jwal, for making my presentation easier. Now, when I was listening to various presentations, in fact, I get also certain perspective. Now, one very interesting thing that comes up again from this overall presentation is how much less we two traditions, Theravada and Vajrayana, kind of know about each other. Now, this is not my first experience. I remember actually I think it is last year when I spoke about mind in the presence of His Holiness Dalai Lama, and few expressed the view that what I said goes very much with Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Then I smilingly said that no wonder, because it comes from the early basic Buddhist tradition. But then what I realized is we don't know about each other very much. So the root cause is ignorance. As you know, ignorance is the origin of suffering. So this root cause of of ignorance on both parts. Theravadins don't know much about, almost nothing about Tibetan Buddhism, and the same thing with the Tibetan Buddhist. I think this is a very, very, I mean, we can't say this to the world. But on the other hand, coming from Sri Lanka, I'm sure you may have heard about late Professor G.P. Mallasekara, who started World Fellowship of Buddhists in the mid-50s last century. In fact, the basic insight of World Fellowship of Buddhists, WFB, was that Buddhists have so many reasons to get together and work together rather than being separated. So that was the philosophy behind World Fellowship of Buddhists. So Mallasekara saw that long time ago. But I think still we need to go fairly a long way to see that, we in the Buddhist traditions, we are not saying different things. Of course, there can be cultural differences, how we wear our clothes and, how do we do day-to-day things. But the basic philosophy, philosophically, so in that sense, coming from that background in Sri Lanka, also I have another reason. I did my study with late Professor David J. Kalupahana, who studied with late Professor K. N. Jayatilaka. Now, when Kalupahana presented Nagarjuna as a restatement of early Buddhism, actually many people did not like, because they wanted to think that Nagarjuna to be saying something very, this emptiness to be something extremely exotic concept. But Kalupahana showed that no, he is saying basically what the Buddha said in a somewhat different language. And he did same thing to Vijnanavada. He said this is not Vijnanavada in the sense of idealism. He showed that this is Vijnanavada in the sense of Buddhist psychology. And he said, he translated Vinshatika and Trimshatika, and he showed that Vinshatika and Trimshatika is really restatement of the early Buddhist teachings. Now, these are philosophical, the connections we have between the traditions. Of course, we can go deeper into these things, and my job this afternoon is not that. But so in that sense, I think our effort to understand basically the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta is something very important. Let me see whether I can do any contribution in this. In my own presentation, in fact, what I'm going to do is something pretty basic, in the sense I'm going to first look at the sources of Satipaṭṭhāna practice, then I will be looking at what Sati is, and then I'm going to give you a basic brief exposition summary of Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, which you already have seen. So the locus classicus of mindfulness meditation in the Theravada Pali canon, Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, greater discourse on establishing mindfulness, Digha Nikaya, long discourses, 22nd discourse in the collection, PTS edition, D2, second volume, you have the pages. Now, I have translated this as establishing mindfulness. In fact, it is very interesting to see that the way we understand Satipaṭṭhāna, whether it is Satipaṭṭhāna or Sati Upaṭṭhāna. Now, the translation of this discourse as discourse on establishing mindfulness, some of you translated as placement of mindfulness, is really Satipaṭṭhāna. But then, of course, Sati, according to Visuddhimagga, has the characteristic of Upaṭṭhāna, the presence of mind. I think even you can say the better meaning of Satipaṭṭhāna is Sati Upaṭṭhāna, the presence of mind. However, I'm not saying which one is good or bad, in the sense, although I said better, because when you translate Sati Upaṭṭhāna, you are laying emphasis on the presence of mind. So there you are looking at the real sati aspect. But when you translate this as establishment of mindfulness, you are laying more emphasis on the 4 aspects of mindfulness. So both translations are correct, but of course, from the point of view of laying emphasis, you can see there is a difference. However, the presence of mind, Satipaṭṭhāna, mindfulness, seems to be the meaning, particularly when you look at the Western practice of. I think they seem to have picked up this meaning particularly. But anyhow, looking at the sources, and also, as you know, somewhat abridged version is found in the Majjhima Nikaya middle-length discourses. 2 related discourses found in the Majjhima Nikaya Ānāpānasathi Sutta, mindfulness on breathing, and also Kayagata Sati Sutta, again Majjhima Nikaya, mindfulness of the body. In the Samyutta Nikaya collection of connected discourses, a section devoted to mindfulness is found, Satipaṭṭhāna Sañyutta, connected discourses on mindfulness. And then you have 104 discourses, out of which the last 55 which overlap with the discourses in the Magga Sañyutta. A related collection is Ānāpāna Sañyutta, again in the connected discourses you have containing 20 discourses. In addition, there are many scattered references, as you showed and also pointed out by some other speakers, scattered here and there, because there are so many discourses that deal with references to mindfulness and related phenomena in the entire canon. And Buddhaghosa's commentaries, including his Visuddhimagga, provide elaboration and clarifications. At the same time, it is interesting to see that Buddhaghosa, in the entire Visuddhimagga, if you look at Visuddhimagga carefully, you will see that Buddhaghosa is not really discussing elaborately on Satipaṭṭhāna meditation. Yes, I mean, he discusses almost everything, but not Satipaṭṭhāna as we are discussing today. Of course, he has analysis and exposition of sati, but it is interesting for students of textual students to study further why Buddhaghosa has taken different. In a way, this again is not my domain here, but how Satipaṭṭhāna became so popular today has to be researched, because I'm not going to detail into it, but how started it in Myanmar, and then how this Myanmar meditation went in all over the world, how then the people picked it up. Of course, that story is a known story. But then, we are sort of today, even in the discussions today, here I found that, you are asking questions like, can you attain Nirvana only by Satipaṭṭhāna? Can you attain Nirvana only by developing one Satipaṭṭhāna, Kaya Anupassana, Vedana Anupassana? I think that those questions shows that kind of we have inflated this quite, I would say, unnecessarily and unrealistically. Because, of course, if I were to explain it, I will go into a lot of details. But the whole thing is, it is important to study, of course, by the modern scholars, the short history of Satipaṭṭhāna, starting from late 19th century and then early 20th century throughout, and then coming and how it went to anyway. That's another interesting thing. So we do have Visuddhimagga and the commentaries. And then in the modern literature, again, Animesh mentioned about this book, numerous work on mindfulness in English, Bhikkhu Analayo Satipaṭṭhāna, The Direct Path to Realization in Buddhist Publication Society, is the most systematic work I have found. It is very useful actually. As you will see, my presentation is very much indebted to his presentation. And important thing is, next thing would be how to define sati. Sati derives from sarati, to remember, recollecting what one said and did even in the remote past. Satima hoti paramena sati nepakkena samannagato. Chirakatampi, Chirabhasitampi, Sarita, Anusarita. This comes in the Majjhima Nikaya Seka Sutta. So, Satima hoti paramena sati nepakkena samannagato. One is mindful, and one is mindfulness and intelligence, sati nepakka. And Chirakatampi, Chirabhasitampi, Sarita. One recollects, remembers even things done or said, even in the remote past. So you can see one very basic meaning of sati is to remember, to recollect. While this basic function of sati is very useful in practice, sati in the present context seems to go deeper to signify the presence of mind which makes even memory possible. Because if you take recollection or the ability to recollect something and also being mindful are related but two different things. But basically, when it comes to Satipatthana meditation, I think we are talking about the presence of mind. It is with the presence of mind you can recollect something you did in the past. Suppose you did something without any mindfulness in the past, it will be enormously difficult for you to recollect that. So, presence of mind is the one actually that makes even the recollection of the past possible. Although sati is translated into English as mindfulness, but it exactly needs to be clarified. Although sati is a key concept in the Vajk Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, it does not say what it is. We need to look for other instances for clarification. Again, this great, very long Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta does not define what Satipatthāna is. Again, of course, this desire to define is something, something of the modern mind. We look for definitions, but Buddha was not too much worried about the definitions, perhaps. Whenever we expect definitions, what we see in the discourses is a collection of connected terms, not really a definitions. But of course, Buddha does define, but Buddha is, as you know, later. Now let me take you to a couple of discourses. One is Dvedha Vitakka Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 19. Discourse on two kinds of thoughts. Two stages of reflective practice has been described with reference to the behavior of a cowherd in two seasons. In the last month of the rainy season, when crops are ripe, the cowherd has to guard his cows quite vigilantly to check and curb them. So the term used are diligent, ardent, resolute. In the hot season, however, when all crops have been removed to the village, he would guard his cows sitting at the root of a tree just by being mindful, only to be mindful. Sati karaniyang eva hoti. Now, when you try to define what mindfulness is, what sati means, Dvedha Vitakka helps. Now this cowherd, when the crops are being cultivated, if your cows go and eat them, you are in trouble. So the cowherd has to really safeguard his cows and also the crops very carefully. But then, interesting thing is when all the crops have been harvested and taken into the village, then of course such danger is not there. So cowherd is taking it easy and relaxing, lying under a tree and just watching over. Now this second stage is compared to sati. So sati is something not what you do purposely. Like the Venerable said, when we say breathing happens whether we think about it or not. It is something automatic. But of course, in Satipatthāna, what we are supposed to do is we just observe what happens automatically. So, it is not something you do something on purpose. So, this is one aspect. Of course, there are other aspects. In this context, the function of sati contrasted with being diligent, ardent, and resolute. The state is described as unremitting mindfulness was established. Upaṭṭhita sati asammutta. Now, upaṭṭhita sati, Satipaṭṭhāna, sati upaṭṭhāna, actually they both go together. So I'm referring to Bhikkhu Analayo's page 53 here. And then further, in the Sañutta Nikaya connected discourses, sati has been compared to a watcher who guards the city by preventing unknown people from entering and allowing known people to enter. Dovarikoti Satyayatang Adhivachanang. So Dovarika, the protector of the gate, protective act of Sati. So Sati protects minds getting into trouble. So, but it watches. Sati is similar to the probe of a surgeon. Esaniya Sallam Esay, probe for the arrow. When somebody comes with a wound, something has gone into the wound, so the surgeon will use the probe to look for what is there. So Sati is like that. With the help of that, you take it out. So Esani is the probe. Esaniya Sallang Esay, you look for the sal, you look for what is hurt in there. So this is a preparatory role of Sati for insight. And then we have further Sati as a careful charioteer. Sati in relation to body is similar to carrying a bowl full of oil in one's head. So when you are carrying a bowl full of oil on your head, you have to be very, very careful, because otherwise it will slip. So Sati is connected to that. And also Sati has non-interfering and uninvolved detached observation. This last aspect is again very, very important. Sati has non-interfering, uninvolved and detached observation. Now, I will come to that point again. A prominent textual difficulty is the not infrequent presence of concept of Miccha Sati or wrong mindfulness. See Analeo page 52, note 31, he collects roughly about 50 or 60 references where Miccha Sati. This in particular contradicts with the later Abhidharmic interpretation of Sati as a wholesome aspect of mind. Now, according to Abhidharma tradition, Sati is Kusala Chetasika. Now, it is wholesome. Now, if Sati is wholesome, there is a question, how can there be Miccha Sati? Because can Sati be Miccha if it is a wholesome thing? How can one be mindful about the presence of Akusala in one's mind? Now, we were talking about Dhamma. In the Dhammanupassana, the meditator is conscious about the presence of Nivarana, Kama Chanda, in his mind. The answer seems to affirm the non-interfering character of Sati as the present moment awareness. As Sanyutta Nikaya 1, this is PTS pages, it is said that one is not without anger due to the presence of Sati. It is very interesting in one place where in the Sanyutta Nikaya, divine being comes and says to the Buddha about Sati, and says a person with Sati is without anger. Buddha agrees with everything except this last thing. Buddha says a person with Sati is not without anger. In other words, the job of Sati is, when you are angry, to know that you are angry. So, in fact, the Sati doesn't remove your anger per se. I think this also answers some questions that came up in the discussion today. People were asking whether you can attain nirvana by, developing Satipaṭṭhāna. Actually, I think when you look at these discourses, you can see that in Satipaṭṭhāna, Buddha seems to be laying emphasis on one particular important aspect of this development. But of course, if we take this to be constituting the entirety of the Buddhist path, I think that is not correct. Now, for example, when you say, we will come across that Vinaya Loke Abhijja Domanasan, you remove having given up Loke in the world. Abhijja Domanasa. Abhijja Domanasa. Abhijja means the excessive desire. Domanasa means anger. Now, of course, you have to be ultimately Sati. You have to, with Sati, you have to be Vinaya Loke Abhijja Domanasa. Now, just by being mindful, you can't be Vinaya Loke Abhijja Domanasa. It might need entire samsara for us to get rid of this. So I think we need to understand this whole teaching in a proper context. It doesn't mean that Buddha is really giving some kind of, extraordinary shortcut for people to, go to nirvana right away. Of course, ultimately this course says that if a person develops this even within 1 week, for 1 week, but which means that I'm sure it must be enormously difficult for one to do that. Within 1 week, but not impossible. Maybe that's the point Buddha is trying to make. I'm not sure. I'm subject to correction, but I think this needs to be viewed in a right perspective. So this seems to be the answer to affirm the non-interfering character of sati as the present moment awareness in the present moment. So now let me take you to the 4 Satipatthanas, which of course you have been listening from the morning. Now I'm just quoting the discourse. Monks, this is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of dukkha and discontent, for acquiring the true method, Nyaya Sadigamaya, for the realization of Nibbana. Therefore, Satipatthanas. Now again, I'm quoting this because for some reason, when you read it, you can see that for the surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of dukkha and discontent. Now, very often people sometimes ask, is it right to use Satipatthana as a psychotherapeutic method? Something very worldly. Of course, Satipatthana to be fully effective, it has to have samma, ditthi and all these things. But it looks like that, of course, even in the mundane level, you develop this, it's surmounting sorrow and lamentation. It's a very basic level of suffering. I think for which you can see that all over the world today, people seem to be using Satipatthana for that. So we cannot say that it doesn't produce any result. Even for this fairly mundane level. Anyway, in regard to body, now this again, a monk abides contemplating the body. Kaya, kayanupasi, again, you all discuss, I'm not. Now look at these terms: diligent, clearly knowing, and mindful, free from desires and discontent. In regard to the world, now, atapi, diligent, clearly knowing, sampajano, mindful, satima, and then vinaya loke abhijja domanasang, free from desires and discontent. Abhijja domanasa, now excessive forms of lobha and dosa. Now I think if we are thinking about sati as ultimately the practice leading to nirvana, I think we will have to take all these adjectives very seriously. Ultimately, free from desires and discontent. Now, being free from desire and discontent requires for us to practice many more things, more than mere awareness. I think that's where the answer lies, whether we can attain nirvana right away by mindfulness. Of course you can, but provided that it is free from desires and discontent in regard to the world. And also again we discussed this question whether we can attain chitta, Kaya Vedana, Chitta Dhamma, these aspects, what is the reason for these aspects? What is the rationale? I think again the answer is given here in regard to the world. Kaya Vedana, Chitta Dhamma, physical body, feelings, thoughts and phenomena covering both good and bad. I think that constitutes the world. Vinaya loke, in Pali discourses, the term uses loka. Now, loka, as you know, of course used to refer to the physical world, but in a very interesting manner, Buddha defines. Buddha says, imasmin yeva bhyama matte kalebare sanyimi samanake lokangcha panjapemi. Buddha says that loka is within this fathom-long body. Ultimately, of course, Buddhism doesn't reject or deny the existence of the external world, but the world we can talk about meaningfully is the world we know of. I mean, any other world will not make meaningful. So in that sense, kaya means your kaya, vedana means your vedana, chitta means your thought, dhamma means in your mind. So in that sense, we can see that why Satipatthāna is Satipatthāna. Why Satipatthāna is having Kaya Vedana Chitta Dhamma. Why Kaya Vedana Chitta Dhamma means the loka. Because that is the experience world about which you can talk about meaningful. So therefore, I mean, this is why I thought I should come up with this translation for your knowledge. Now, I'm not going to go into detail. Animesh did this. So when we contemplate body, we have in breathing and out breathing, we have 4 postures, bodily movements and actions, 32 parts of the body, 4 great elements, and 9 stages of decomposition of the body. Now, this is basically the Kaya Anupassana. Now, look at this again. This is the textual translation. In this way, in regard to the body, he abides contemplating the body internally. He abides contemplating the body externally. Again, we discuss in detail what is this internal body and external body. It's kind of interesting because I remember one of my students who really did his PhD on this, Korean scholar, wrote a big chapter on this. But basically, I think when you say internally, externally, you know internally what happens. And then, through your own understanding of your own inner experience, you can generalize the outside experience. I think it's basically that, but of course, it is open for debate and discussion. Body externally, or he abides contemplating body both internally and externally. Or he abides contemplating the nature of arising in the body. Abides contemplating nature of passing away in the body. Or he abides contemplating the nature of both arising and passing away in the body. Now again, why I am quoting this is you can see that how this in the meditative terms, how this goes to vipassana, right? I mean, when you really go into the deep into the practice, of course you start with in-breathing and out-breathing. But when you contemplate on the arising and the passing and the both arising and the passing away of your body, I think it is basically the vipassana. Or mindfulness that there is a body is established in him to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness. And he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. Now I think this is something very interesting. Some speaker referred to MBBSR, mindfulness stress-based reduction, and many similar the movement today. But basically they seem to be emphasizing on this independent, not clinging anything in the world aspect in a much diluted way, but basically you observe the mind. You are present about your mind. You know what is going on. But you might be thinking, my gosh, what is so big about that? Actually, there is something very big about it. If you really know when something goes on, that something goes on, I think that's a huge piece of information about yourself, your self-understanding. Now, if I know that when I'm really angry, that I am angry, you can see that my cognitive function in a different level. I mean, emotionally I am angry, but cognitively I know it. You can see 2 different things going on at the same time, so I will not be really rash in doing something. Even if I do something, I will exactly know what I am doing. You see, that's the difference. So here you can see that not clinging to anything in the world, but of course in a much simpler way is you are just observing, you know what is going on inside you. That is how in regard to body he abides contemplating the body. Now my own remarks is this process is applicable to all 6 practices mentioned above and also to the rest of the three contemplations, Vedana, Chitta and Dhamma. Okay. Now let me take you to the second one, contemplation of feelings. Here again, feeling pleasant feeling, Sukha Vedana, he knows I feel pleasant feeling. When feeling an unpleasant Dukkha feeling, he knows I feel unpleasant. When feeling neutral feeling, Adukkha Masukha, Pali term is neither Dukkha nor Sukha, he knows I feel neutral feeling. Then when feeling worldly Samisa, pleasant feeling, unworldly Niramisa pleasing, worldly unpleasant feeling, and so on, unworldly unpleasant feeling, so Samisa, Lokiya, worldly neutral feeling, unworldly neutral feeling, he knows I feel an unworldly neutral feeling. In this way, in regard to feelings, he abides contemplating feelings internally, he abides independent, not clinging to anything else. Again, bodily, oh my goodness, up to 2 minutes. Okay, let me try to do the impossible. Then we have contemplation in the mind. Again, the same thing, of course, you have heard about this saraga, lustful, without lust, and so on. In this way, in regard to mind, thank you. He abides contemplating the mind internally, externally, and externally. Now again, someone can be really questioning, how can I be mindful about somebody else's mind? At different level, when somebody else's mind, what is in the mind come out, raga, dosa or moha, you can see that from the behavior. But something that is deeply inside the mind will be difficult. But again, interesting thing is, now if I know about my own mind, if I know in my own mind, I can have raga, dosa and moha without letting anybody know it. I can think about the same thing about others also. Even I look a saint, but I am not. Others look saints, they are not also. I mean, there are various ways of, comparing yourself. So I think in that sense, in this way, in regard to mind, he abides contemplating the mind internally and externally, and both internally and externally. I mean, as you can see, there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this practice, looking at particularly oneself and the other. And then contemplation of dhammas, I'm not going to describe these things, 5 hindrances, ethically bad things. And when it comes to 5 aggregates of clinging, of course, pancha upadana kanda. Pancha kanda is basically all what we have. But when we say pancha upadana kanda, we have upadana based of pancha kanda. So we can say these are ethically not good things. But then look at 6 internal and external spheres, eye and form and so on. They are neither ethical nor unethical, they are just neutral. But 7 factors of awakening, then they are part of the awakening, enlightening process, which are good. And the 4 noble truths, dukkha, samudaya, nirodha, magga. So you can see the term Dhamma has been given a very wide meaning here. Both negative things, positive things, both external things and internal things connected to oneself. Ultimately, 7 factors of enlightenment, even in the 7 factors of enlightenment, you are aware of your enlightenment, sambojjhanga, and also the 4 noble truths, your understanding. Now this shows that ultimately when you know that dukkha, samudaya, nirodha, magga, we are talking about a very developed person in the Buddhist context. Important thing is, even is such a developed person, sati is playing a role there. So sati, I think in some place, I don't remember the exact reference, Buddha says sati sabbathikang vadami. I say that sati is applicable to everything. So here you can see in this analysis, sati is applicable to everything. Now in this way, in regard to dhammas, he abides, okay, this is the text. He abides contemplating the nature of arising, passing away, both arising and passing away the dhammas. Now, of course, somebody, I think it is Animeshu, who referred to that there can be certain textual errors also. I mean, there are, but here is very interesting. When you have 4 noble truths even you can say contemplating, arising, passing away. Now, another way to look at this would be whether it is a good thing or bad thing, whatever happens in your mind, things come into your mind. Now, of course, you get certain realization, but realization also passes. Now, difference is for an arahant, he can duplicate, reproduce that realization. But of course, realization on the other hand, as an experience, is something that passes. So in that sense, it's very important to see that at any level, how the presence of mind is there. Mindfulness, that there are dhammas is established in him to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness. And he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. I think this ultimately mindfulness guided by Vinaya Loke Abhijja Domanasa is something to be very, very important. Now, this reminds me, several scholars, of course, refer to Yuva, particularly the Tibetan tradition is so familiar with Nagarjuna. At some point, Nagarjuna says, Shunyata sarva drustinam proktani sharanam jinai. Yeshantu shunyata drusti tan asadhyan babhashire. So shunyata is to give up all the drustis. But if shunyata becomes a super drusti, then you are incurable. Now here you can see that ultimately, even with regard to nirvana, you are very realistic about it. Otherwise, you cannot attain nirvana, because if you get hooked up in the nirvana, then finally, having done everything, you will not be able to get it. So here, I think something reminiscent of Nagarjuna. Of course, Nagarjuna comes, as you know, later. But here the whole thing is ultimately you give up all the desires, including the desire for the realization. So it's kind of paradoxical thing. Till you get the realization, you have to have the chanda, chitta, virya and vimansa to go there. But once you reach there, so I think Satipaṭṭhāna says quite a lot on these things. Finally, if anyone should develop these 4 Satipaṭṭhānas in such a way, for 7 years, finally 7 days, one of 2 fruits could be expected for him. Either final knowledge, Anya Sativa Upadisese Anagamita, is the final knowledge here and now, or if there is a trace of clinging left, non-returning. This conclusion of the discourse highlights the result-orientedness of the practice of mindfulness. I was wondering really why this particular statement happens in the discourse. Now it emphasizes, if you practice Buddha, kind of assuring that you can get this result. I thought this is not only about Satipaṭṭhāna, this is applicable to the entire path. The path is ultimately to be practiced and get the result. Now, with one last comment, I will conclude. In the Samanyapala Sutta, King Ajatasattu asked a very practical question from the Buddha when he visits the Buddhist Buddha to see the Buddha, and these hundreds of people are sitting. So from the king's point of view, they are just sitting and being silent. He must have seen that, my God, if I had these people around me, I could have used them for the war and other things and the agriculture and all that. Then finally he asked this very interesting question. So all these people are doing jobs and they get some result. What is the meaning of this job? What do you get by doing this? And then Buddha went on giving whole list of things you can get by doing this particular job, being a monk and being a meditator. I thought that practicality is something fundamental to Buddhist teaching, because it's not a mere philosophy, as the whole theme of today's and tomorrow's discussion. Satipaṭṭhāna is not only the theory, it also both theory and practice. I think that is the aspect that is finally laid emphasis from this statement. So I don't think I should get any more time, and thank you very much for listening.
Okay, since the session 1, we could not really take questions, and because of this is very enlightening lecture, special lecture. We know the Professor Asanga Tilaratna scholarship and his deep passion for the practice. So why not people here? And Tibet House so kindly invited the professor from all the way from Sri Lanka. Why not people, if you have questions, 1 or 2 questions, I would be happy to introduce yourself, number 1. Number 2, just 1 question. Number 3, make it very precise. Okay, Ajirji, please make it very precise to give opportunity to more number of people.
Okay, thank you very much for this presentation. My simple question is that most of the time you use the word Satipaṭṭhāna, whereas the earlier speakers, everyone used most of the times Satipaṭṭhāna Sutra, and they come from 2 different Nikayas.
Yeah.
And the impression given is that in the case of Satipaṭṭhāna Sutra, probably there was some gap and Buddha added something. That's the kind of impression given. I don't know whether I'm right or not. If that is so, it gives the feeling that the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutra is not complete and the Buddha has to add something to that. So I really want to understand what is that Maha part of the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutra.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. In fact, since I was invited for this speech, I looked at both suttas again together. What is missing, or what is the difference? The difference I found was actually the Majjhima Nikaya Sutta is a abridged version of the same discourse. So it is only the details are the difference. But basically what happened was the Majjhima Nikaya Sutta is the more detailed one. Perhaps the editorial stage at the first Sanghayana, the makers of the first Sanghayana may have made to distinguish it from the shorter one, they may have made it Mahasatipaṭṭhāna. But again, in many discourses, Chula and Maha, 2 discourses go together. But in this particular case, there is no Chula Satipaṭṭhāna in the Digha Nikaya. So Digha Nikaya, there is only Maha Satipaṭṭhāna. The regular Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta is only in the Majjhima Nikaya. So 2 different collections. But my hunch is perhaps Majjhima Nikaya has a shorter version. The Sanghitikaras, the makers of the first Sanghayana named it Maha. But doctrinally there is no difference. Only difference, distinction is in the details. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, Joji.
3 questions are there. Okay.
I wanted to ask Professor Tilakaratne, in the Anagata Vamsa, which is one of the Sri Lankan chronicles of the Buddhas to come, they say that at the end of the Buddha Shasana, the first discourse to be forgotten will be the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutra. And I was wondering in what context that may have been written. Is it because it's very difficult to practice? I mean, I haven't understood why that should be the first.
Thank you very much for the question. Again, you can see this Anagata Vansha and the whole, not only in Anagata Vansha, there are some other places where the disappearance of the Sasana has been described. So, it's very interestingly, disappearance happens from the most difficult things. So, that is what happens. Now, perhaps, I don't know what the reason means, but perhaps this is the very important aspect of the practice. So gradually from the most difficult thing, most important things to most simple things. That is the way of disappearance has been described. So I think it is in that sense, because this is the core of the practice. So when people don't practice it, sasana doesn't exist in the proper sense. Now many people seem to understand the disappearance of sasana in a physical sense, but today with where we can put the entire Tripitaka in one pen drive, so the Dharma will never disappear in the physical sense, but of course Dharma will disappear in the sense of practice. Thank you.
Okay, Maya Joshi, maybe last question. And then others can ask tomorrow.
Thank you so much for Professor Tilakaratne. I was fascinated by the last point you made, the practicality, and Ajatshatru's question about what can be done with this. And I asked this, and I want to link it to an earlier point that was made, because today one of the concerns about mindfulness is the abuse of it, shall we say, for perpetuating a status quo which is far from ideal, right? So you have snipers being mindful, you have the military using mindfulness. So does the Buddha, when he lists those series of activities, take that into account? I mean, I'm very curious as to know what kinds of activities he lists, and is there a pattern you see there, or are there any precautions he's taking?
Okay. Thank you again. Enlightening question. As I tried to say, the real Buddhist practice will not be fruitful without samadhi. Without the proper understanding and the proper framework of mind. So if you really do it to earn money or to enhance anything, it will not be called really mindfulness in the proper sense. However, that does not preclude for one to do it and get certain mundane results temporarily. In most of the cases, what is happening with the therapeutic thing is with minus proper, samadhi, people are trying to do that. But I have seen sometimes people still get some mundane temporal results. So if somebody asks me whether it is a misuse of Buddhism, I would not say no. Maybe I'm open to correction here, because in some manner or other, if you practice it, I think such a person will be more amenable to right understanding even subsequently. So therefore, I think that if people practice it even for the not very good reason, in the sense mundane things, I wouldn't disapprove it. That is my personal position.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Asanga Tilakaratne. This is a greatly enlightening presentation, and that one point that which Professor made, sati, simply by the practice of the mindfulness, will it really give you nirvana? People may get a very wrong impression that this will get that impression, that this will get to the realization. But this is, as what Professor very clearly indicated, the same sati can be applied in the negative and in the positive. And then only be within positive, for example, say being mindful. Let's say be mindful in general, mindful of the others' emotions, mindful of one's own emotions. Mindful of others' emotions, we can become very judgmental of the other people. You be very sharp in seeing the nuances of the others' emotions. On that basis, you can see the weaknesses of other people. So that way you can become very judgmental.
You can be empathetic too as a result.
Exactly. And then whereas if you're being very mindful of your own emotions, then instead of being judgmental, you can see that your emotions really subside, not for the reasons that this itself is the cure to all your negative emotions, simply because that your mind performs one action at a time. Your mental consciousness performs one action at a time. That is observing your mind. So when the anger is there, when the irritation is there, when you observe the mind, your mind is utilized to observe it. So now the mind, instead of being angry, it is being driven to observe your own mind. So it becomes the observer, not becomes the observed. So the observed part becomes inactive. That is the irritation, anger, and so forth. That subsides. And then the observer part becomes activated. That is that you are observing. So the observer mind is very calm, and the observed is agitated. That subsides. So this is one thing. And then the very important point made is that the stability, the mindfulness, bringing the mind to the stability, that alone will give rise to nirvana. This question, many people get impression that this is what gives rise to. It is like, for example, say the light, the flame of the candle. The flame of the candle can be very steady, but can be very faint If it is very faint, it does not dispel the darkness. However steady the light is, it will not dispel the darkness. Finally, the Buddha Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha, is that all our negative emotions, finally they are rooted, all the samsara miseries, they are rooted in ignorance, which is like the darkness. So our job is to eliminate this darkness. And even though the light is so steady with this sati, so steady that it's not wavering at all, but it doesn't guarantee that the darkness will be eliminated. There must be the brightness. It should have two elements. One is the brightness of the light, and the other one is the steadiness of the light. Both should be emphasized. So the brightness is for the pragya or the prajna. Prajna, wisdom, shut up. That is very important. Plus the steadiness, plus the driving force, which is renunciation in the case of the Theravada, the practitioners, and the bodhicitta and renunciation both in the case of the Mahayana practitioners. Okay, with that, thank you so much, Dr. Alaktik, the Asanga Tilakaranaji, and our chief guest here, and all the distinguished scholars and brothers and sisters. Thank you so much.
Before concluding this session, I would like to invite Mr. Ajiru Vidyaji, ex-IAS, Indian Civil Administration, currently studying Buddhism at Tibet House doing Nalanda Master course, to please come on the dais and felicitate our speaker and chairperson. I would like to thank everyone for joining with us today. The topic for tomorrow's session is Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, Essence of Tibetan Origination, Mantra and Four Seals. The venue will be same for tomorrow. It will start at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Please don't forget to bring your program kit with you. That's all for today. Have a great night. Good night.